I've replayed the months before my wedding so many times in my head that the memories feel warped now, like a recording that's been paused, rewound, and played again until the sound cracks. When people talk about ignoring red flags, I used to think they were exaggerating. That no one could really miss something that big, that obvious. Now I know better. Because my gut didn't whisper. It screamed. And I still chose not to listen. From the outside, my life looked perfect. I was engaged to Daniel Harper, a successful, steady man with a good career in tech. Our wedding was set at one of the most prestigious country estates in the city. My parents were well-known, well-connected, and well-respected. I was about to step fully into the life I'd been raised to believe I deserved. But perfection has a way of suffocating you. Daniel and I had been together for 3 years. He was reliable in a way that made my parents adore him. He showed up. He worked hard. He didn't drink too much, didn't cheat, didn't gamble, didn't embarrass me. On paper, he was flawless. Emotionally, he was distant. At least that's what I told myself. He worked insane hours at his software consultancy, 12-hour days that often turned into nights. He came home tired, distracted, already halfway asleep before dinner was over. When we talked, it was usually about logistics, vendors, payments, schedules, guest lists. I told myself this was just stress. That once the wedding was over, once life settled, things would feel lighter again. But deep down, I felt invisible. My parents didn't help that feeling. If anything, they amplified it. I grew up in a household where appearances mattered more than comfort. My father, Richard Chambers, had spent years cultivating his reputation in local politics and elite social circles. My mother, Marjorie, treated every charity event like a performance. I learned early that love was conditional, earned by looking right, behaving right, marrying right. When I brought Daniel home for the first time, they were polite. That was it. Polite. Not warm. Not welcoming. Just assessing. They never outright said he wasn't good enough, but I heard it in the way my mother corrected his table manners, in the way my father asked pointed questions about his income and long-term trajectory. When Daniel proposed, they accepted, but with expectations. Big ones. They insisted on a wedding that reflected the Chambers standard. Lavish venue. Expensive decor. A guest list that ballooned to nearly 300 people, many of whom I barely knew but who apparently needed to witness my marriage to preserve our family's image. Daniel pushed back at first. I remember him trying to suggest something smaller, more intimate. I remember rolling my eyes, telling him he didn't understand how my family worked. And that was true. But what I didn't admit, not to him, not to myself, was that I liked it. I liked the attention. I liked the fittings, the tastings, the feeling that this wedding was an event people talked about. Even if it meant draining Daniel's parents' savings. Even if it meant ignoring how uncomfortable his mother looked every time costs came up. I justified everything by telling myself this was once in a lifetime. That mindset bled into everything, including Kylon. Kylon had been part of Daniel's life long before me. College roommate. Best friend. Practically family. When I first met him, I thought he was charming in a careless, effortless way Daniel wasn't. Where Daniel was methodical, Kylon was spontaneous. Where Daniel thought before he spoke, Kylon said exactly what came to mind. I noticed him noticing me early on. The way his eyes lingered just a little too long. The way his jokes slowly became private, shared glances that didn't include Daniel. At first, it felt flattering. I was used to admiration. My parents raised me to expect it, but coming from someone who wasn't obligated to love me, it felt intoxicating. I told myself it was harmless. After all, he was Daniel's best friend. I would never cross that line. Except lines don't always announce themselves. They blur. They shift. They move when you're not paying attention. As the wedding planning intensified, Daniel grew more absent. Always on calls. Always distracted. Always exhausted. Kylon, on the other hand, was present. He helped with errands. He offered opinions. He noticed when I was stressed. When I complained about my mother's impossible standards or my father's constant critiques, he listened, really listened. He'd say things like, "You shouldn't have to carry all this alone," or anyone would feel overwhelmed in your position. Daniel never said those things. Not because he didn't care, but because he was drowning in responsibility and didn't know how to articulate comfort. I filled in the blanks with resentment. Our texts started innocently, wedding-related at first, then jokes, then late-night conversations when Daniel was still at work. Inside jokes formed, the kind you don't realize are dangerous until you're already guarding them. I noticed Daniel noticing. Sometimes he'd look up when our phones buzzed at the same time. Sometimes he'd ask what was so funny. I'd brush it off, laughing, telling him it was nothing important. And he believed me. That trust should have stopped me. Instead, it emboldened me. The truth is, I liked having someone who saw me, not as a bride-to-be, not as a daughter carrying expectations, but as a woman who could still be desired. Kylon looked at me like I was a secret, like I was something just out of reach. That feeling became addictive. I started dressing differently around him. Subtle changes at first. A lower neckline, a tighter fit. Nothing obvious enough to raise alarms, just enough to feel powerful. When Daniel and Kylon stood together, the contrast became sharper in my mind. Daniel was dependable, safe, predictable. Kylon was reckless, thrilling, attentive. I told myself I deserved excitement. The guilt came later. Soft at first. A whisper I could ignore. After all, nothing physical had happened. Yet. That word did a lot of work in my head. As the wedding date crept closer, my anxiety skyrocketed. The final fittings. The seating arrangements. My mother's relentless micromanaging. Daniel's growing exhaustion. Somewhere along the way, the wedding stopped feeling like the beginning of a marriage and started feeling like a deadline. A point of no return. Kylon sensed it. He always did. A week before the wedding, he offered to take over hotel arrangements for out-of-town guests. Daniel was grateful. I was relieved. It felt good watching Kylon step up, take control, ease some of the pressure. It also gave us an excuse to talk more, to meet more, to cross lines that now seem obvious in hindsight. By the time the rehearsal dinner arrived, I was living in two worlds. One where I smiled for photos, laughed with relatives, accepted congratulations. Another where my heart raced every time my phone buzzed with Kylon's name. That night, standing in a nearly white dress among crystal chandeliers and people who barely acknowledged Daniel, I felt hollow, like I was watching my life happen from a distance. When I slipped away for air, I didn't plan what happened next. I just knew I couldn't breathe anymore. And I didn't realize that somewhere nearby, everything was about to collapse. After I stepped away from the rehearsal dinner, I told myself I just needed air. The ballroom felt too bright, too full of eyes measuring me, judging me, cataloging every detail of my appearance. My phone vibrated in my hand before I even reached the exit. Kylon. I didn't open the message right away. I already knew what it would say. He'd noticed me disappear. He always noticed. That realization should have scared me. Instead, it made me feel seen. I walked out into the warm night, heels clicking softly against the stone path outside the venue. I finally checked the message. He asked if I was okay, said I looked overwhelmed, said he could tell I needed a break. I typed back something casual, something dismissive, but my hands were shaking. We met in the parking lot under the pretense of talking logistics. That's what I told myself. That's what I would have told anyone who asked. But nothing about the way he looked at me felt professional or innocent anymore. He said I seemed distant lately, that the wedding felt rushed, that Daniel didn't really see me. Hearing my own doubts reflected back at me felt intoxicating. Like permission. I didn't stop him when he suggested we go somewhere quieter. I didn't remind myself of the ring on my finger or the vows I was supposed to say the next day. I didn't think about Daniel at all. I told myself I deserved one night where everything wasn't about expectations. The hotel wasn't the wedding venue. It was one of the boutique hotels nearby, sleek, modern, discreet. The kind of place people went when they didn't want to be noticed. Walking through the lobby, my heart pounded so hard I felt dizzy. I told myself I could still turn back. I didn't. Once the door closed behind us, reality blurred. Everything felt unreal, like I was watching myself from outside my body. The guilt was there, but it was drowned out by adrenaline, by the rush of doing something forbidden. I justified it in 100 different ways. That Daniel was emotionally unavailable. That the wedding was more my parents' dream than mine. That I was suffocating under expectations. That this was just a mistake, not a pattern. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about timing. I didn't think about how cruel it was to do this the night before my wedding. I thought I could compartmentalize it, lock it away, wake up the next morning and step back into my life like nothing had happened. That illusion shattered faster than I expected. At some point, half-dazed and careless, I recorded a short Instagram story. I don't even remember why. Habit, maybe. Muscle memory from a life where sharing moments had always felt harmless. I realized my mistake almost immediately and deleted it within seconds. But seconds are enough. I didn't know who had seen it. I didn't know what damage had already been done. I left the hotel before sunrise, my body aching, my mind numb. I told myself I'd slept at a friend's place. That excuse sounded thin even in my own head, but I clung to it. When I walked into the apartment later that morning, Daniel was asleep. Or pretending to be. The quiet felt heavy, loaded with things unsaid. I avoided his eyes, slipped into the guest room, tried to erase the evidence of the night before. I rehearsed my lie while brushing my teeth, while fixing my hair, while changing into casual clothes. By the time I sat at the kitchen island, it felt almost believable. When Daniel emerged, I braced myself. But he didn't accuse me. He didn't question me. He didn't even look suspicious. He smiled. That smile made my stomach twist. He said he was glad I was okay. That was it. No interrogation. No anger. Just acceptance. Relief washed over me so fast it almost knocked me over. I thought I'd gotten away with it. That belief carried me through the morning preparations, through the hair and makeup, through the bustle of bridesmaids and stylists. Everyone told me I looked beautiful, radiant, like a bride should. Inside, I felt hollow. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from Kylon, half dreading one. None came. I told myself that was good, that it meant we'd both agreed, silently, to pretend it never happened. As the ceremony time approached, my nerves spiked again. The weight of the dress, the tightness of the corset, the finality of everything pressing down on me. This was it, the last chance to step off the path. I waited, and waited. Something was wrong. The ceremony was supposed to start at noon. By 11:55, whispers rippled through the bridal suite. Someone mentioned Daniel wasn't at the altar yet. My father frowned, checking his watch. My mother tried to reassure me, though her voice carried irritation more than concern. By noon, the murmurs grew louder. My heart started racing. Panic crept in, cold and sharp. Where was he? Why wasn't he answering calls? I told myself he was just nervous, dealing with something technical, being his usual responsible self. But the longer the delay stretched, the more my chest tightened. Then his voice echoed through the ballroom. Not beside me. Not at the altar. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. When he announced there would be no ceremony, the world seemed to tilt. Gasps filtered back to the suite. Someone dropped something. My mother's face went pale. I didn't understand what was happening, not until the screaming started. I ran. The heavy doors to the ballroom felt impossibly far away. When I burst through them, still clutching my bouquet, I saw the projector screen. And then I saw myself. The footage was unmistakable. The hotel room. The bed. Kylon. Me. The timestamp burned into the corner like a brand. For a split second, my mind refused to accept it. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. The room spun. My ears rang, and all I could hear was the roar of shock from hundreds of people who were never supposed to know this version of me existed. My parents' faces crumpled. Daniel's parents looked devastated. Guests stared, whispered, filmed. I screamed for it to stop, but my voice drowned in the chaos. And then I saw Daniel, above us, watching. The betrayal in his eyes was worse than the footage itself. Cold. Controlled. Final. In that moment, I knew I hadn't just ruined a wedding. I had destroyed everything. The moment I locked eyes with Daniel from across the ballroom, something inside me collapsed completely. Not cracked, not bent, collapsed. I had imagined, in my worst fears, that if he ever found out, there would be yelling, accusations, chaos between just the two of us. I never imagined hundreds of people watching my life disintegrate in real time, their shock reflected back at me like mirrors I couldn't escape. My parents rushed forward, my mother grabbing my arm so tightly it hurt. My father stood frozen, his face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't find words strong enough to exist in this moment. The video stopped, but the damage didn't. Whispers tore through the room like wildfire. I could feel eyes on my skin, burning, judging, recording. Phones were raised everywhere. This wasn't just humiliation, it was preservation. People wanted proof they'd witnessed this. They wanted souvenirs of my downfall. I screamed Daniel's name again, begging him to stop, to come down, to talk to me privately. I didn't care how it looked anymore. I would have said anything, promised anything, but he didn't move. When he spoke, his voice carried through the hall with a calm that terrified me more than shouting ever could. He said there was no wedding, that I had made sure of that the night before. The truth hit harder than the exposure itself. He hadn't just found out, he had known. He had planned this. Every second of it. People say revenge is ugly. And it was. But in that moment, standing there exposed and shaking, I couldn't deny how methodical it was. How deliberate. How deserved it felt, even as it destroyed me. I tried to reach him when he finally came down from the balcony. I tried to explain, to justify, to frame it as a mistake born from pressure and fear. The words spilled out clumsily, hollow even to my own ears. None of them mattered. When Kylon appeared, half-dressed and panicked, my shame deepened. Seeing him there, out of context, stripped of secrecy, made everything uglier. Smaller. Less romantic. There was no us anymore, just evidence. When Daniel struck him, the sound echoed through the hall, and for a brief second, everything went silent. I screamed, not because Kylon was hurt, but because reality finally punched through my denial. This wasn't a mistake. This was destruction. The man I was supposed to marry walked out without looking back. My parents followed him, stunned and humiliated in a way I had never seen before. I stood there alone, still in my wedding dress, surrounded by people who would never see me the same way again. The guests didn't leave immediately. They lingered, gossiping, dissecting, feeding on the spectacle. My mother dragged me out eventually, her face hard with rage and shame. In the car, she didn't say a word. Neither did my father. At home, the silence was suffocating. By evening, the calls started. Relatives. Friends. People I barely knew. Some asking what happened. Others already pretending they knew. I stopped answering. The next day, I woke up to the reality that I no longer had a fiancé, a wedding, or a future I recognized. Daniel had already packed my things. Every box labeled neatly, efficiently, just like him. Seeing my life reduced to cardboard and marker ink broke something in me. When he dropped everything off at my parents' house in the middle of the night, it felt symbolic. I was being returned. Rejected. The confrontation the next morning was brutal. My parents marched into his apartment, demanding explanations, compensation, control. I stood behind them, silent, my head pounding. When they demanded money from him, I felt a brief, desperate hope. Maybe this could still be contained, managed. Daniel crushed that illusion easily. He reminded them, calmly, coldly, that none of this would have happened if I hadn't cheated the night before my wedding. That sentence echoed in my head long after they left. I tried to speak to him afterward. Alone. Without my parents. Without accusations. He didn't listen. He didn't yell. He didn't insult me. He simply ended it. That was worse. The weeks that followed were a blur of fallout. The wedding was canceled publicly, but the scandal lived on privately. Screenshots circulated. Stories mutated. People took sides. Some defended me. Most didn't. My parents' social standing took a hit they hadn't anticipated. Invitations stopped coming. Donations dried up. Whispers followed us into rooms that used to welcome us warmly. They blamed me for that. They never said it directly, but I felt it in every sigh, every disappointed glance, every conversation that ended too quickly. Kylon tried to reach out once. A long message full of apologies and self-pity. I didn't respond. Whatever fantasy I thought existed between us evaporated the moment reality arrived. He wasn't a savior. He was a catalyst. Daniel filed for divorce paperwork within weeks. There were no drawn-out battles. No dramatic courtroom scenes. Just signatures, dates, finality. I signed without protest. By the time it was over, I felt empty in a way I didn't know was possible. Not devastated. Not hysterical. Just hollow. I moved into a small room in my parents' house, surrounded by trophies and photographs from a life that now felt fictional. I avoided mirrors. Avoided social media. Avoided anyone who might look at me with recognition. Nights were the worst. I replayed everything, the ignored instincts, the justifications, the moment I chose excitement over integrity. I wondered how many times Daniel had swallowed doubt for my sake. How much trust one had dismantled without realizing it. People online argued about my story. Some called Daniel cruel. Others called him a hero. Some said I deserved worse. Some said no one deserved that level of public humiliation. All I knew was this. I earned my consequences. I didn't lose Daniel because of one night. I lost him because I believed I was entitled to more than honesty. Because I treated loyalty like something optional. Because I thought I could have excitement without cost. I was wrong. Now my life is quiet, smaller, unimpressive, and for the first time, honest. There is no wedding ring. No future mapped out by my parents. No admiration to hide behind. Just me. And the understanding that some mistakes don't just change your path, they erase the one you were standing on.